Today, this is all about this guy. Bob, what was happening in this photo?
See, I guess I think that was somebody taking a picture of me in the lab.
Yeah. So this is really your lab. It's not a movie set.
No, it's the lab. Yeah, they try to be artistic.
Yeah. How about this one? Same lab.
Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. How about these your books, or you rented these books?
Actually, that part looks fine. This is the only reason it looks funny is my office isn't that organized. But
so I'm just going through a few.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're proud to be on the Globe, probably.
Well, not with that title.
But not with that. Oh, I didn't read it. Yeah, we went fast. So Bob is a special guy. Apparently, he has 44 honorary degrees. You know, if you do the math, that's like a year, 2 years of your life having to travel around the world. Like when you get called to get an honorary degree, do you cringe because it's like a day and a half, or are you excited?
It may depend where it is.
Yeah. And then, just Bob is amazing. Here he is with George Bush, Obama, the Queen of England. He's gotten a lot of prizes there. He's with Bill Gates. I emailed my friend Erling Norby, and he's one of 5 people for 22 years decided who got the Nobel Prizes. He's a physiologist. And I said to him, Bob's gotten 220 major awards. He didn't get the Nobel. What's going on? And he said, Bob has a fantastic career, which he can describe vividly. The walls of his office are overcrowded with recognition of his achievement. I said, you didn't answer my question. What about the Nobel? And he says, John, all information on candidates for Nobel Prizes remains secret for 50 years. Hence, my lips are sealed. What I can say is that the prize in chemistry can be given for a discovery of an invention. So I don't know how to interpret that, but you may be in the mix. I don't know. But I'm sure you're not holding out. You're doing just fine. So is this fake news, or did this really happen?
Oh no, that was definitely, yeah, that's real.
Yeah. So it's Bill Gates. Did you go to him, or he come to you?
Well, that picture, he came to me, but I certainly got to him a number of times. So I give him a lecture once a year for several hours.
Yeah.
But he's been great. They've been very supportive of our lab.
Yeah, and one of the first times he came, I know this is a little out of order, but why did he come? What was he excited to talk to you about or challenge you to help solve?
Well, a bunch of things. It was 2012, and I had met him before because he helped Nathan Myhrvold with his intellectual venture system. And I remember one day we had a session on inventing, and I guess he was talking to Lowell Wood, who actually is one of the top inventors in the world, and he was talking about, I guess, issues like, could we do better vaccines? Could we do better nutrition? And Lowell said, well, he should come and see me. So he did. So that was 13 years ago, and we've actually worked very closely ever since. And with not just him, but the foundation's been wonderful, and they've been supportive of different companies I've been involved with and have helped start. And they he I was just there in August, and he's always been super helpful.
Great. There's another. These are some of those awards. That's not Photoshop, right? Those are real.
No, none of those are.
Okay, yeah. So this I just found on the web. What are we looking at here?
Different products that have been based in part on things that we've done.
And what does this range say? Like,
I have to look. So it's.
You're not a one-trick pony here.
Yeah, well, it's like we've had a lot of great people working in the lab and a lot of great companies, but they started from. But there are all kinds of treatments for cancer, eye diseases. I think this is I have to lean back. I think this is actually aquaculture, which it's Yanni Zohar, who did a lot of work with us, developed. Which is now this huge industry. I didn't even realize it. In fact, Dan, I remember. I don't know if you went to his talk back at that 70th thing. He said it's a $250 billion industry. But so he's developed a lot of different implants.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a little more formal background on Bob. He's an economic force, GDP of a small country. We don't have the headquarters of Meta or Microsoft here, but we have Bob Langer, ultimate inventor and medical science translator. He's one of the most prolific inventors, biotech entrepreneur of our time. He's contributions include spanning drug delivery, tissue engineering, nanotechnology, and entrepreneurship. He has challenged conventional wisdom in his field. Grew up in Albany.
Yes.
And your dad lived through the Great Depression and World War II?
Well, he lived through the Great Depression and he fought in World War II. He was a navigator.
Yeah. And he ran a liquor store in Albany?
Yeah, a billiards parlor in Troy and a liquor store in Albany.
Yeah. And he came home and played math games with you growing up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How did your dad kind of shape you and your sister and your mom? Just think of those early days. I know you had erector sets and chemistry sets and microscopes, and you had a small lab in your basement. But when you think back to your origins, those early days.
Well, I lived on, we had this house in Tudor Road and the couple bedrooms but I was a great neighborhood. I'd play sports a lot, baseball and football and stuff like that. But in terms of what you're asking of my dad, I mean, he and my mom, they'd get me these presents, and some of those presents, were regular things, but they did get, if you're old enough, they had these sets called Gilbert sets, and they made a Rector set that you could make a rocket launcher and a robots and a parachute jump. They had the microscope set, and you could watch shrimps, eggs hatch. And they had a chemistry set, which you could mix things together, and I don't want to say blow things up, but you could you could make colors change. I always liked magic and make rubber and different things like that. So I that is what I set up in our little basement.
Yeah, early days. And then you went west. You went to Cornell.
I guess that's west. It's funny. I had never been actually west of Buffalo, I think, till I was 25 years old. But,
Yeah.
But that was west from Albany.
Yeah. And you studied chemistry. I think in retrospect, you said you were never tested for attention deficit, but maybe that was a superpower or something that you had going on.
I don't know if I looked at it as a superpower. I thought there was something wrong with me.
Yeah.
It's like I tried to pay attention in class. They didn't know. I mean, they didn't have that term then. So I tried to pay attention in class, and I would just daydream a lot.
Yeah.
So it was hard. And there were a number of classes like English and French that I did very badly in, and I just had trouble paying attention.
So then you got into a PhD program at MIT, and in reading a little bit about your background, you taught some high school kids. There was like an alternative high school that was set up, and you had a lot of fun teaching there, hands-on learning, making ice cream, making rubber. How did that shape early Bob Langer?
So what happened was when I was an undergraduate at Cornell, I was a teaching assistant. I really liked that. And I came up to Boston actually in 1970 to start graduate school at MIT. And I was looking for some way to do things like that. And I did some tutoring in Roxbury and also in Cambridge. So a group of people were starting a school, alternative high school in Cambridge in 1970, and which they'd call the group school. And they asked me if I would help on math and science. And actually, it was an amazing thing what they did. I mean, but I don't know if people think back to what it was like here in 1970. Cambridge actually, even though it's got Harvard and MIT, had the highest high school dropout rate in the country. And there were all these projects like Jefferson Park and Roosevelt Towers. So so anyhow, we started the school. And the students had a major part of governance, but also Cambridge was pretty liberal. I mean, it's pretty liberal now, but it's very liberal then. And so it was like you didn't have to take math. You didn't have to take really anything that you didn't want to. But I tried to make it fun and tried to make it relevant. And I still remember what I was very proud of. The first year, I think 5 kids out of 37 signed up for math. But the second year, 45 out of 50 did. And so
the word got out.
Yeah, well, they seemed to like, and then chemistry, we created a more, kind of a chemistry program with MIT gave us some funding, and I think that was that to do some useful, you come up with practical ways of making chemistry useful, like making polymers, even making ice cream, which I'm always fond of, which illustrates what's called freezing point lowering, and so. But anyhow, and I also, actually, interestingly enough, I got very involved in helping. One of the biggest problems when you start an alternative high school for people that don't have any money, it was for working class kids, is that I got involved in fundraising, and I'd help people write grants, and we did raise a reasonable amount of money. So what effect did that have on me later? Well, you know, if you're a professor, you spend a lot of time raising money, and it's not very easy. But however hard that is, it was a lot harder doing it with the school. So I think that that really shaped one of the things I did. And secondly, I mean, I really loved doing the teaching, and so I think that's part of what happened. Is a lot of my classmates, when I graduated, they wanted to work for oil companies. They paid a lot of money, and I did. I interviewed those places.
So let me double
Yeah.
down on that. I wanted
Sure.
to highlight, you know, this is a guy who has a 100-person lab and has taught so many, and there are legions of people out there that are disciples of Bob Langer, and you know, maybe that high school experience was seminal in helping to shape you. In terms of 74, you graduate, you got 20 job offers from big oil. You know, you had credentials to go help the oil industry. You write about flying down to Louisiana, where an Exxon engineer said that if you increased chemical yield by 0.1%, it would be worth billions. And then you were flying home. What were you thinking at that point? And I know you had gotten 4 Exxon offers around that time. But you know, did you go into the oil industry like a lot of other chemical engineers? And what choice did you make at that point?
Yeah, when I flew back that night thinking about making such a tiny increase, I just thought to myself I didn't want to spend my life doing that. Yeah, and so I didn't. I really wasn't sure what I was going to do, because that's, you know, almost everybody then worked in chemical engineering, worked in the chemical industry, mostly the oil industry. So mostly I just thought, you know, worst, I'd look for other things, and I tried to think about things. But worst came to worst, I'd maybe work in an ice cream parlor for a year or two, because I like
chemical.
I like that.
Yeah. So you probably recognize this chart.
Yeah.
I know you applied to CUNY to be a teacher. They didn't get back to you. Applied to 40 other schools. No one got back to you. But then someone in your group said, hey, there's this surgeon who sometimes hires unusual people. So maybe fill in, you know, what happened at that point.
So yeah, so what happened is I did start seeing ads to do curriculum development, like I did at in City College of New York, which you mentioned was the first one, but they didn't write me back, and nor did a lot of others once I had that idea. So
I bet you have honorary degrees from some of those 40, but that's another thing.
Well, actually, they weren't very good schools. They still didn't even write me back.
Yeah.
But I think the honorary degrees I have are from pretty good places.
Yeah.
But you know, like Oxford and Harvard and Yale and others. But anyhow, those places I didn't write them. I mean, they didn't have those kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
But you know, so you know what so what happened was you know, one day I was walking in the lab. I also wrote a lot of hospitals, and after that, the next idea was working in like a hospital or medical school. So I wrote a lot of those places who didn't write me back either. And I was getting very good at things like, but so when I was walking in the lab one day, one of the older scientists, Barry Bunow, who was actually an MD, he said to me, Bob, he said, there's a surgeon in Boston named Judah Folkman. And he sometimes hires unusual people. Dr. Folkman, I had not heard of him, but he was a very famous young surgeon, actually the youngest full professor in the history of Harvard Medical School. And so he called me up and said, well, would I like to come over for an interview?
And you worked. What's going on in this chart? Is this had you started working with them at this point?
I did, but I don't know if anybody remembers or knows what you probably have to be older to no, but Dr. Folkman had this idea that if you could stop blood vessels, you could stop cancer. It was a really very revolutionary idea that most people didn't really believe in, and he was widely criticized for it, but he, you know, wouldn't give up, and he, you know, and his idea in particular was that the thing that caused blood vessels to grow was a substance, like a protein, that would diffuse out and be a signal to those blood vessels. So that was his theory, but of course it wasn't proven. So he hired me to do two things, I guess. One, prove he was right, but two, in so doing, isolate the first substances that could stop blood vessels from growing. It was actually a pretty hard thing to do, because there's no way to study at that time, there was no real way to study blood vessels, so we had to invent one. and the difficulty is there's always background blood vessels in most places, but there's a few places where there aren't. The chorioallantoic membrane of a chicken and it's corneas. And so our idea was we'd put a tumor in those, which would cause blood vessels to grow, but then we needed a tiny little particle next to it, like a micro or nanoparticle, that could deliver these large molecules like proteins or DNA. And that hadn't been done before. And he was advisor to the one company in the world, that was ALZA, at that time, that was working on anything even close to that. And they had like Nobel Prize winners and people like that in their board. They all said that was impossible. But if we were going to solve the blood vessel problem, we had to solve the delivery problem. So that graph that you showed came from a paper we wrote in Nature in 1976, the journal Nature, that showed for the first time you could release and deliver any large molecule. This was after 200 failures of mine, but it showed for the first time you could release them. It's also the first time nucleic acids had been shown to be released. Nucleic acids, for those of you that aren't familiar, are like DNA or RNA. So that's what that graph is.
So a few years later, you presented your breakthrough in controlled release systems at the Midland Macromolecular Symposium. Can you talk about what that experience was like and how
Sure.
that shaped you?
Sure. So I practiced this talk for a long time. I was, I think, 27 years old, and I gave the talk, and it's a 20-minute talk, and I thought when I was done, and I was a terrible speaker at the time, I was very nervous, but I just, I thought when I was done with the talk, I didn't do that badly because I didn't forget too much what I was going to say. I didn't stammer too much. So I thought when I was done with the talk, and all these people are like a lot of older, very famous chemists and engineers, I thought, and I was so naive, I thought these are going to be nice people. They would want to encourage me, this young guy. I could see the scientists in the room laugh. So at any rate, when I got done, a whole bunch of them come up to me and they said, well, we don't believe anything you just said.
So you have about 1,500 issued and pending patents worldwide. Does that sound about right?
Sounds about right.
Tell us about the first patent you got. Was that easy?
No, it's never easy. No, we got rejected 5 times. And I remember there was a guy at Children's Hospital, Al Brazaghini. He was head of the tech transfer office there. And I remember one day he came to see me. He said, Bob, you're costing the hospital so much money. He said, you should just stop trying to keep filing this. The guy's never going to allow it. And he said, you should just give up. But, I don't like to give up. And so I started to think, how could we convince the patent examiner to allow it? And I remembered, as I was saying to you, everybody told us this was impossible. It couldn't work. And I wondered, maybe someone wrote that down. So in 1982, after getting 5 years of rejections, I did this. You can do a search. It's called a science citation search, and see who wrote about you. And I found some articles that were very helpful, saying that this was incredibly surprising that Dr. Folkman and I did that. And we showed that to Brazaghini, and he showed it to the examiner. And the patent examiner said, gee, he had no idea, but he will allow the patent if I could get written affidavits from the 5 scientists who wrote that article that they really wrote it. So it's actually a great strategy for getting patents. But anyhow, I wrote all 5 of them, and they were nice enough to write me back. They did write it, and we did get a very broad patent.
Great. Your humble nature is legendary. People say you see the potential in everyone, and it shows. You make everyone feel important. You respect people's time, effort, and interests, and you're quick to give credit to others and express appreciation for their individual work and contributions. I never met Shockley, the transistor guy, or Watson, but I hear they weren't the most pleasant to work with. You've had a mega lab, 100 people for years, for decades. I think when you turned 70, and you're a little older now, someone wrote this down. 400 of your trainees are professors. 500 have worked in industry or started companies. 100 or so have worked in government. 48 have been elected the National Academy of Inventors. 23 National Academy of Medicine. 23 National Academy of Engineering. 3 National Academy of Sciences, and 40 MIT Tech Review 35 under 35. How are you able to attract talent? How are you able to develop talent? How do you make this so people weren't eating their young? I mean, you've done something very remarkable, and do you acknowledge that? Do you take ownership of that? And what is it that you've done to facilitate this?
Well, you have people in the audience who probably could answer it better than me, like Dan and others. But I mean, to me, that's why I became a professor and a teacher, was to help people, to teach people. So that is important to me. I mean, I put that first, and so um, I think that I think if people know you care about them, and also if they feel they're working on things that are really important, that can change the world and make it a better place. And I like to think that that's the kinds of things that we have worked on. You know, that the things that you mentioned will happen. I mean, if you treat people well, I think. I mean, and what can I say? Why not? I mean, I never met Shockley, but I have met James Watson. You know, I think to me, I would feel awful if somebody had a bad experience in my lab, even if they made a great discovery.
Yeah. So I have a few questions, and then we're going to move to the next part of the program. Much of your research was initially dismissed as not real engineering or not real biology. How have the walls between scientific disciplines changed since you began, and what work still needs to be done?
Yeah, well, I think they've changed quite a bit in some ways. You know, though in a lot of ways they haven't. But the simple thing that I usually think about when you mention that is, if you went 50 years ago, like I went to Cornell as an undergrad, and it doesn't matter what I'm saying is true for almost every college. You know, there's a building for math, a building for English, a building for chemistry. You know, and I think today, you know, there's buildings like the building I'm in has both biologists and engineers, and all engineers, not all 7 or 8 different. Normally, there's one for chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, so everybody's together. And I think that, you know, we call that convergence at MIT. I think there's a number of places that are doing that more and more. That doesn't mean that's the only thing you should do, but I think now there's a tremendous amount more interdisciplinary efforts by people.
What helps you be consistently creative and innovative even after decades of cutting edge work?
Well, it's nice of you to even say that. I guess the way I think about it is, it's not just me. We have, like you mentioned, we have a big lab, and I think we have an environment that I hope is conducive for people to invent and be creative. And, you know, and I do encourage that. But, you know, I also read a lot, and, you know, I go to meetings and stuff. You know, I have all these great students and postdocs and fellows coming in, and I also think the Boston area is special that way. You know, the way I think about it is, you have MIT. I'm not going to brag too much, but you have MIT, which is, I think, clearly the best engineering place in the world, and you have Harvard, which is probably clearly the best medical place. And you have these people that come back and forth, like fellows, you know, like Dan, who's here, and Kohane, who's here, and others, and they come to your lab, and they mix with the MDs, mix with the engineers, and, you know, people work together. And I think that when you have so many incredibly bright people, it's not that hard to do what I do.
Yep. How do you decide which high-risk, long lead projects are worth betting on, especially when resources are finite?
Well, if you think something can make a giant difference, and you feel you have the background or the kinds of people that can contribute to it, then I'd probably try it. But they'd be ones that I feel have a high impact, and they're probably, I'm trying to think how best to say this. You know, sometimes you have what I'd call a one-trick pony. You might do something that might affect one disease. Much of what we do are to really create discoveries or inventions or platforms that, if they're successful, could be applied for any disease. I mean, going back to your point, with that Nature paper, you know, that was we delivered large molecules when people thought that wasn't possible. And I have to, and at that time, if somebody asked me what it would have been useful for, if I was to pick one thing, I probably would have said insulin. That's never come to pass. On the other hand, it's been useful for all kinds of anti-cancer drugs. It certainly set the stage for things that Alnylam and Moderna and lots of companies have done with nanoparticles, and many, many other applications that I would never have dreamed of in 1974 when I first started doing that. And that's been true for a number of the things, like these ideas that I've had with Jay Vacanti about creating new tissues and organs. You just don't know exactly. I'm never smart enough, I don't know if anybody is, to really predict the future. But if you create some broad discovery or invention, whether it's us or somebody else, they'll figure out ways to use it that could be very important, I believe.
What key signals do you look for when deciding which research ideas have commercial spin-out potential?
First, the biggest thing I think when people try to start a company in academia is probably starting too early. So what I'd like to have, if you can have everything, is to have a platform technology that can be applied to a lot of different things. I'd also like to have in vivo data, animal data at a minimum. I'd like to have at least one great paper out, and I'd like to have a really good patent, and then some students or postdocs that really want to work on it. In terms of commercial potential, I think if you have a platform, it's not just us that know what the commercial potential is. A lot of times investors and venture capitalists and business people we work with, and clinicians and people brainstorm together to figure out what the best commercial potential is. Most of the time when you look back, the first one that you think of isn't true. It doesn't come to pass. It's rare, I think, that the first one you think has commercial potential is what happens. Amgen, for example, their first thing was a blue dye. Alnylam, it was for diseases in the back of the eye. I mean, Moderna, we never had, who would have thought that you were going to have COVID 10 years later? I mean, and on and on. I mean, Momenta, ends up like myasthenia gravis is one, and any autoimmune disease. But none of those you would have thought of in the beginning, and it's a combination of smart people working with you, that help figure those things out, and the times and advances that get made.
So Minsky and McCarthy coined the term AI in 1955 when they wrote a grant to the government to do a retreat in Dartmouth. I think Werner Institute professor, you're one of 9, had thought about cybernetics before the term AI. AI has played a big role with AlphaFold, gotten a lot of attention. How do you see AI uniquely surpassing conventional methods today in the life sciences and nanomedicine, and what does that look like for the future of the work that you and your group has been doing?
Yeah. Well, first, it's good you pointed out, which a lot of people don't realize, that AI isn't new, right? It goes back to, I think most of the population thinks it happened a few years ago.
Yeah, Turing.
Yeah, it's actually over 80 years old.
Ada Lovelace, I have a book by her.
Yeah, but it goes back over 80 years. But I think the power of computation and advances that people have made, and certainly ChatGPT, that's such a dramatic demonstration for people about what AI can do. It shows people it can be important. At MIT, Raphael Reif, when he was president, he established a college of AI, and it was a number of years ago. So what can it do? I think the power of AI is when there's enormous amount of data, good data, it can do a lot. And so, but the misconception that also often comes is, well, that it can do anything without the data. And also if the data is not really, what should I say, comparable or just to give an example, people might think you could go to the literature and predict all kinds of things from clinical trials and things like that have been published. But I think that's doubtful because there's a lot of data that's not going to be there. So a lot of biotech companies are started based on AI and they've fallen flat. And yet it's not surprising to me if you try to say you could go and look at clinical data and make some of these predictions. I mean, there's so much that's not there, right? You may not know what the meals they ate and 5,000 other things. So I think you really need a lot of data. The more data you have, the more good data, the more powerful AI can be. And so I think it will, people are already using it. Regina Bargeli at MIT has been using it for, even giving better predictions for, biopsies, like for breast cancer and things like that. We're certainly using it with Dan Anderson on designing better lipid nanoparticles. I mean, there's a tremendous number of things that you can use it for if you have a lot of data. And really the power, I think, is that one could maybe do 2 things. You could have high throughput screening, which are biological or analytical techniques that could allow you to get that data. You wouldn't have had that 50 years ago. You could combine that data and with with AI, and I think you'll do very well. Even from our standpoint, Nick Galakatos and I and Mike Sema, we started this company, Transform, 26 years ago to do something very simple. This is in the bio area. So then, and still now, most of the drugs that people, or at least maybe half the drugs that people come up with aren't soluble, or the soluble is super low. So what we did is Dave Putnam and Hungming Chen in our lab, and then they went to the company, they would do high throughput screening. With solubility, it was pretty easy. You could add different excipients, and not just one excipient, you could add combinations, and they would do thousands of experiments. And we called it machine learning then, and we could use that and analyze what we did, and then we could iterate and keep doing better and better. And that company ended up doing, very, very well. Johnson & Johnson ultimately acquired it.
Yep. What do you see as the next frontier in making medical innovation more accessible worldwide?
Yeah, well, I think what the Gates Foundation is doing, and we do a lot with them. I mean, they do a lot more, obviously. We're just one little piece. But I think what they're doing is really important. I mean, some of the things that we've worked on with them have to do, with better nutrition, which might seem obvious, like why can't you just send vitamin pills? But that doesn't really work. I mean, just to pick an example that we've done in our lab is, something like, I'll just pick one country, say you take Nigeria, according to UC Davis, 20,000 kids die a year of vitamin A deficiency. But one of the things, and you could send them vitamins, but like I say, that won't change anything. But what they do in Nigeria and some other places in Africa is they have bouillon. So when Bill Gates came to see me, one of the questions they asked is, well, could you ever, bouillon, you have to boil it, right, for several hours. He said, could you ever put things like vitamin A or iron in a situation where it could be boiled for 2 hours and nothing would happen, and then when somebody eats it or drinks it, it'll become available? And, we came up with some ways to do that I believe will be, that's already approved by the World Health Organization, the FDA equivalents in these countries that I hope will be introduced in a few months. But there's so many things like that. And then we're also working on another thing that makes it difficult is people don't come back for injections for a second vaccine. And we've come up with ways, again, this Anna Jakulenik in our lab has done this, where you can give one injection, and yet you get like 11 boosts with it. It's designing the right kind of nano or microparticles. So that's another.
And that's a polymer is facilitating that.
Yes, it's a
so in
polymer.
The graduate, he says it's plastic. So maybe.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So
in
it
flesh,
could,
he said ball bearings.
Yeah, but it could be polymer. It's a combination. Or if it's an mRNA vaccine, it'll be polymers and lipids. It's still in animal trials, but we've done non-human primates, and it's looking promising. But all these things, anytime you try to do any of those things, it takes a lot of work. Other things, to your point, I think are helping, which we're trying to do, myself and Ram Sassaskaran in different countries, and trying to help them start biotechnology industries in couple different countries in Africa. And I think those are. But I think those are some of the things that I hope will help.
So a few quick props. I'm going to pass this around. This is a 100-year-old MIT yearbook. And I don't know if you know your Star Trek, but Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan happens 250 years from now. What does biology, life sciences, chemistry look like 100, 200 years from now? From like if you extrapolate where we are and where we're going.
Yeah, well, I'm sure I won't even be close. But I mean, I'm sure we'll have learned a tremendous amount more.
Yeah.
I think it's in ways that you can't even dream of. I mean, that's also the beauty of science. Is doing basic research and make discoveries. I mean, that's generally when you mention the Nobel Prize, that's usually what it's given for in medicine, is discoveries that people make. That yield new knowledge. I mean, so when you talked about James Watson, I mean, nobody understood the structure of DNA, and he and Francis Crick figured it out. And I think there'll be so many things like that. I think we'll understand cells in a different way than we do now. maybe we'll be able to create cells from scratch and all kinds of things that I think now we just can't even dream of. One of the times I turned older, Edith Mathiowicz, who was one of my postdocs, she did come up with an equation, and it had all these things in it which I'll never be able to remember, and it went like this, and then all of a sudden it had this. There was this rise in 1986. And
Has to do with a neurosurgeon, PhD from
a
Harvard.
neuroscientist.
Yeah, neuroscientist, yeah.
Well, she was from Harvard and MIT.
Yeah, okay.
So, and then she asked the audience, she said, well, why was that, did it rise so much in 1976? And she said, well, that's when Bob met Laura, who was my wife.
Well, that's a great segue. So I didn't tell you this, but I've deputized 4 other people to come up here. It is kind of like, this is your life. And the first is your son.
Okay.
And Sam runs a farm with his wife, I think, in California. And he and I have done a bunch of phone calls, and he's really excited to talk to you. And he also brought some images that we've
oh my
put
God.
up. So Sam, can you come on
Yeah,
down?
that's not him.
No, I know. And then we have Dan, who's at Children's Hospital, and we have Jan, who's using your brilliance to help with recycling. And then is Shreya here yet? And then Shreya, who's doing a professor at Harvard, who uses or is connecting the brain to bionics and also doing stuff with pills, which she can explain much better. And they have things that they want to say. So Sam, why don't you come on down, and here's the clicker. Yeah. And you're doing great, Bob. You know he's the most patents of anyone living cited the most times, 400,000. Like this is a legend, and I hope he has bodyguards wherever he goes.
All right. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Sam.
So Ria, my wife and I, we were sitting over the last few days really thinking about this opportunity of what to ask you, and just really thought about some key moments from your life, and we were thinking about what can we ask that maybe people haven't heard. And we thought of a few things.
Okay.
We thought, first I think we realized that your story really is this hero's journey, this going through all these trials and not knowing how it's going to go, and at some point you really got to this point where you had succeeded, and you had this message to share with people that now I think it's so succinct. It's like you have these clear messages that you've learned, these clear lessons. And what Ria pointed out too was that when you look at the moments from your life, there were these clear choice points that you had. And we wanted to dig into those choices a little bit, like how you were really able to make them.
Okay.
And, our intention was to really bring it to moments so that people here can just feel your humanity and just the challenge of the journey too that all of us experience. So we'll start with this picture. What do you know about this picture?
That's me a long time ago.
And if we were to transport ourselves there, what do you think we would find in?
I don't know that you would have found anything terribly surprising. I like to think I was just like a regular little kid. I play football with my friends and baseball with my friends, and I don't think I was a good student. I don't think I was anything super, but I don't know if I was like 6 or whatever there, but I think it was. I felt I lived in a nice neighborhood with nice kids, and it was fun to play.
And one thing I think we see through your journey is you have this persistence. Like you're really willing to go for these dreams despite what anyone's telling you. You've all these rejections and people telling you things. And I'm curious, was there an early moment in life where you were really encouraged to have that persistence, or you were taught to really believe in yourself?
Yeah, I really don't think I was. My dad and mom really all the time they just sounds simple. They said, we just want you to be happy. They did not push me hard. They were, my dad was a very smart guy, and and like I said, people said played math games with me and stuff like that. But I don't think I saw anything like that. I mean, he was a hard worker, certainly, but, he ran a liquor store, and he'd be there, 6 days a week and worked long hours. But, I mean, that's because he grew up in the Great Depression and got to see a lot of people who were once very wealthy, really get bankrupt and stuff.
Maybe there's something in that we just want you to be happy that's actually able to help you really go after some of these dreams.
I think wanting to be happy, I think that's good. I like that. I think I hope I've told you that.
Definitely. Okay. Where are we here?
That's Cornell and Olin Hall. It's a chemical engineering building at Cornell. And that's me in front of it with a tie on, which I don't usually have.
Is there, and we also pointed out it's very long, the tie.
I'm terrible with ties. I actually dislike ties tremendously, and I'm not very good at tying them. I wonder if it's even, yeah.
Do you have one moment from college that you would, if you were to relive one moment from college, what do you think it would be?
Yeah, boy, that's an interesting question, and I have not thought about it. And I don't know if it was a moment. It was all of a sudden, I did a terrible start at, well, maybe I'll do this. It's more of a realization, which is going to sound terrible, and I wouldn't give anybody this advice. But, like we talked about, I had ADHD, and I couldn't pay attention. So my first 3 terms at Cornell, I just did terrible. I mean, for the B- average when I was like, and I would keep falling asleep in class. And finally, like after 3 terms, I thought to myself, if I'm going to fall asleep in class, I know a lot more comfortable place to fall asleep, which was my bed. And so the way it was at Cornell, and I don't know if still like, you had lectures and you had recitations. And the lectures were like 300 people, and that's where I would fall asleep. The recitations I went to, and if you're an engineer, the important thing is to be able to solve problems. So anyhow, I cut every lecture. I cut 140 classes. My grade points went up enormously. The last 5 terms at Cornell, I had better than an A average because they give A pluses. But I think that realization that I was just so incapable of learning in a class, and that had a big effect on me, just trying to do problem sets. And I kept doing problem sets, and because I did problem sets, I'd get good at them.
Both of those are powerful lessons. I mean, in the beginning, we want you to be happy. So many people are chasing, different measures of success, and you're taught, we just want you to be happy. And then people are sort of expected to go to class, and you're realizing, wait, this doesn't work for me. So I think both of those are.
Yeah. By the way, what I just said, hopefully they will not play that back for people at Cornell.
Don't go to class. Okay, where are we here?
That looks like my parents' house. So
Graduate school.
MIT, yeah. Boy, I'm starting to look older. But yeah, I still have the tie on. It might be the same tie.
But Maria pointed out it's shorter, so you had a little better style.
Yeah, maybe. I got better at tying them.
Well, the point this made us think about was you being offered all these jobs at oil companies. And we thought, wow, this idea that you're offered these jobs at an oil company and you decide, I'd rather scoop ice cream, at Steve's than work at these companies. We just wanted to understand, where did you get that idea?
Of ice cream?
Well, just, yeah, that you would just...
Well, I guess
that you would be happy with a very different kind of life.
So I think it's a 2-part question. One is I just couldn't see myself working at the oil companies, including the fact that they were all dressed up every day. I don't like that. But I just didn't like, I just didn't want to spend my life doing something that I felt wasn't that important. So that was the first thing. So if I wasn't going to do that, what was I going to do? And, I did, as I mentioned, keep searching for jobs. But I thought, well, if I was going to take a year off, and I wasn't thinking of taking forever off, I really liked ice cream. So I could see, I remember actually we'd drive from MIT to go to Cabot's at the time in Newton, and there were other places. I don't know if Steve's I don't think was there then, but I just felt like if I was going to do one thing, maybe I would do something like that.
It seems like having that a backup plan of some sort. It seemed like that allowed you to dream, allowed you to be
Yeah.
okay with some measure of failure too.
Well, I think that's right. I just felt like that I could make some money. I could doing the ice cream, and I hoped I wouldn't get too heavy. But I just felt like it would give me some time to think about what I might really want to do.
Okay. Where are
Well,
we
that's me. That's Children's Hospital, and that's Judah Folkman, who I mentioned before, and that's me. Probably looking at a chick. I talked about the chick or eggs with the blood vessels, and that's that under the microscope.
And one story that's really stuck out to me is about you scraping cartilage. How long were you scraping cartilage for?
Couple years, because
And-
that was really the first source to prove that there were blood vessel inhibitors. We were looking at cartilage, and and again, you couldn't get very much. So, first time I got a lot of it was from a slaughterhouse on Clay Street in Cambridge, but then I wanted to get. And you'd have to get rid of the meat. That was the first part of the purification. But then later I made this arrangement with these meat packing places in South Boston, and I got a lot of cartilage and a lot of bones. But I'd use what's called a periosteal elevator to scrape it off. Because
What were you thinking about, as you're scraping this cartilage off?
Well, I
every
was
day for years.
Yeah, I was thinking about that I wanted to solve this problem. I mean, I'm sure I daydreamed doing that too, because
Are there moments of doubt? Are there moments of like?
Well, it's not the most interesting thing to do to scrape cartilage, but I guess I felt like at one point we had people helping me, and so you'd talk while you're scraping cartilage. In fact, one of my roommates, her father tried to make a cartilage scraping machine, and it didn't really work, but still it was worth trying. So you keep thinking about different things, but hopefully I was to hope that we'd be able to use that cartilage to isolate things that might stop the blood vessels. So. I mean, that was the main thing.
You never had a moment of like, why am I doing this after?
I'm sure I did.
Yeah.
But, it was a long time ago.
And here?
Yeah, well, that's 1988. But that's your mother at the time. And that's me.
What was this day like for you?
It was a great day. I mean, it was, really nice. We had the wedding at the Hyatt Regency in Cambridge, and that was a long time ago too. But it was nice. A lot of people, came from all over, and and also we had a great chocolate cake.
I've heard of this cake. Now, so in so many of your talks, you really talk about mom being this bedrock of your life, of your career, and I've also gotten to see every birthday of hers, you just take off completely and spend the day with her. I'm curious when did you really understand that, this relationship was such a foundational part of your life that you wanted it to have that place?
Well, I guess I think about that every day. I feel very lucky, and also Laura, we didn't talk, she's got not only she's got a PhD in neuroscience, and so she understands, sort of the life I have too, in addition to you all, so so it's great to be able to share that with her and get her advice and stuff like that.
Okay. Who's that?
Is that Michael or you, or who's that?
I don't think it's me.
It might be probably Michael, yeah. That's his older brother and our first baby.
How did becoming a father change your outlook on life, your career?
Yeah, well, it really did change it some. I mean, first, it's such a miracle to see the baby come, but still, this was 1989, and I had just moved they'd gotten rid of the nutrition department at MIT, and I was in the chemical engineering department, and they wanted me to teach thermodynamics of all things, which I didn't know. I mean, I thought it was like a very hard thing to teach. And, we'd started like maybe the first company, that I'd helped start, and I still had a big lab, and everybody's asking me, how do you juggle all these, like the kinds of questions John asked? You have all these people in the lab, you're doing these companies. And I thought to myself, geez, all I'm doing is trying to understand thermodynamics so I can teach it to the kids. But Michael, he'd be, next to me, and I'd be reading the book, and he'd be crawling over me and trying to eat the book. I think I even have a picture of him eating the physical chemistry book. But but it was great. I mean, it was a wonderful thing to see. Other than him wanting to eat telephone cords and things like that, it was wonderful.
Wow. So is the lesson there you can juggle a lot of things if you have one really hard thing that distracts you from everything else?
No, I'm not sure what the lesson is. I was lucky that your mother was very helpful, but to me it was a wonderful. I valued tremendously the relationship I had with my father and mother, and it was great for me to be able to try to be in that position myself.
We'll do one more of these. It's a few years ahead.
That's Sam.
Where did you get the idea to? So you used to take a trip with us, each one of us, once a year. Where did you get that idea?
Yeah. So, well, partly because I was so busy. I worked a lot, and we would often take family trips. But one of the things I thought about is, like, I got, being a professor, you get asked to go to sometimes interesting places. And of course, when you're little, I think the places are, so I would often think, well, since I'm so busy, I thought I'd take people, let me one-on-one, to different places. And it started out with kind of some simple things like going to New York City, and I think taking your sister Susan, and then taking Michael to we were all into baseball, taking Michael to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. But I thought those were really good, because what I watched is when we had a family gathering, well, not to mention the fighting between the three children, but also it's like you don't necessarily get to. People won't tell you what they're on their mind unless they're with you one-on-one, and they won't. And if you ask them, like if I asked you, well, what are you thinking about? It's not necessarily going to happen. But you spend 2 days with somebody, even when they're young, and stuff will come up. And I felt like that was really good. And then I'd realized that everybody liked those trips. And to this day, actually, all three of them, we still do those trips. So that's a nice thing.
Where do we think this is?
I think that's the Lemelson Award. That was so that is an inventor award. That was 1998, and that's Laura, my wife. And so they, MIT and Jerome Lemelson started this award for, I guess, the best inventor, and I was the fourth recipient. He'd actually given it to the two people, Boyer and Cohn, that did the finding about genetic engineering, and then they gave it to the guy that developed the mouse for Engel. I forget his name, but Engel. Anyhow, the guy who did the computer mouse, and Doug Engel something, but Engelbart, right? Yeah. But then I got it. I was the fourth one to get it, so that was a real thrill. I mean, I was even dressed up for it.
Bow tie, from tie to bow tie. It's good. So
yeah.
I think this picture makes me think, in your story, there's so much rejection, there's so much, oh, this wasn't working, this wasn't working, this wasn't working. And then it seems like at some point, it all just really starts to work, and so much so that you're able to really share these lessons with the people. I'm just curious, for you, where was this point in your life where it went from like, wow, people are telling me to get a new job, to people are, people won't give me like just nothing's working, to wow, this is.
Yeah, I don't think it was one point in time. I think it was a continuum. I mean, and still today, it's like it doesn't necessarily change. People still give, turn grants down. You run into other problems. I mean, so it doesn't ever fully stop, but there's a continuum, I think, of change. I don't get rejected as much now as I used to. So,
what's this?
Well, that was my 70th birthday in I think about 700 people came, and that's your sister dancing with me, and I can see that I need more hair. That's you, I think, and Michael, and there's Mom. And other people from the lab, I'm having trouble leaning back far enough.
That's okay. And what did it feel like to be celebrated at that point?
Well, it was nice, but it was also exhausting, you know, because you have to, yeah. But it was, you know, looking back, it was extremely special. But it, you know, have that many people come, and you want to talk to everybody, you want everybody to be happy. I mean, I can tell you, I spent with your mother hours, because people made a seating chart, and I just thought, well, this isn't going to work, or that. I spent hours working on things like that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, but you want everybody to feel good.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to bring it to the modern day. I think this was taken this year, right?
Though they have that. I've been there a few times, but I think you're right. I think that is this year.
So I think just as we bring it to this, you know, this moment, more of a modern time, curious how do you most want to be remembered?
I hope as a, I mean, I haven't really thought about it too much, but I hope as a nice person who helped people and maybe did some important things.
I thought you were going to say the nice person part. So I also wanted to ask you your definition. How do you define a good, nice person?
Well, I think somebody that cares about other people, you know, and tries to do what that puts other people at least in as good a spot. I'm probably saying this poorly, but that treats people and wants that person to be treated at least as well as they are themselves.
Great. Well, yeah, I love this arc from your parents with this message of we just want you to be happy to this whole journey of, you know, to me, I think that's such a foundational point, right? Because if you have this idea that we just want you to be happy, it's okay if you fail. It's okay if you know, whatever happens, because you're taught that that's the goal. You know, it's not all these other things. So it's nice to see this full circle from we just want you to be happy to just being a good person, and with all these incredible accomplishments in the middle.
Well, thank you. You know, going back to your question, I was just thought about, you know, one of the things my father always would talk about was the golden rule, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think that is such a simple statement, but I've often thought about that as a guide in some ways.
I feel very lucky. And John, thanks for the opportunity. Very special.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. You were great.
So apparently, when the Nobel family read the news that the patriarch of the family had died and said, you know, maker of dynamite has died, there was a lot of bad press. Turns out he hadn't really died, and the family huddled and said, we got to do some PR. And that's where the Nobel Prizes came from, because the Nobel family had invented dynamite and was selling it. Apparently, the patriarch had never gotten into an engineering school, so he made sure there was no Nobel for engineering. And it wasn't until Jerome Lemelson, who kind of a patent troll, sat on a lot of patents, a billionaire, his family said, hey, let's resurrect the reputation, make sure people remember him for invention. And the Lemelson is definitely a big deal. It's considered the Nobel for engineering. So I have a few closing questions, but now we have Dan Kohane and Jan and Shreya, if you could come to the front row. These are going to be a little bit shorter, and we're going to cut this up into multiple TED Talks and upload this. This is sort of unique, a one-person show. But Dan, you know, come on down. You were 16 years in his lab. You're now a very distinguished leader at Children's Hospital. Any stories? I know you're succinct, but this is your stage. Here's your friend, mentor, and colleague.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Dan.
I had never heard that story about you skipping class. And
I've tried not to tell it very often.
Yeah, and
probably for the reasons I said. You know, I was thinking, boy, that'll get back to. It's a terrible thing to tell students.
Yeah, well, it really resonates, and in the spirit of things I probably shouldn't share. So I did the same thing in medical school. So 6 months into it, I realized I'd go from Brookline to med school in Roxbury, and I would just fall asleep. And I came to the same conclusion as you. I can sleep more comfortably
Yeah.
in my bed. But speaking of medical school, so when I came to your lab in 1996, so I was a pediatric intensive care and anesthesia doc, and my PhD was in physiology. And your lab does tons of things, but they tend to be very centered on the physical sciences, at least as the fundament for the technologies, chemical engineering, chemistry, things like that. And you've had gastroenterologists, orthopedic surgeons, all kinds of doctors come. And so, in terms of intellectual skill sets, it's a very diverse place. And I guess my questions are, first of all, how do you, or do you encourage that? And second of all, how do you get these disparate skills to integrate?
Yeah, well, I do encourage it. I mean, but part of why I encourage it is, I suppose, for a couple of reasons. One, I just, lots of times if you're in academia, you have a grant and it's on something very specific, and people think, and that's also true at a company, you have a job description. But I've always felt like I really want, the best athlete, people who are just very good regardless of what their background is. And so that's part of it. And I found that integrating, when people are together and they have different backgrounds, that actually helps promote, I think, interesting ideas. And I mean, for me, I thought that back to my own career. When I was a postdoc, two of my closest friends were, even today, are surgeons, Jay Vicanti and Henry Brem. And because I worked in the lab with them and I got to know them well. And I just feel like that, working with really great people who have diverse backgrounds, that helped us things and solve problems. And the problems we were trying to solve, I think, did require ultimately very, very different things: clinical skills, sometimes physical things, like you said, sometimes biological things. So I think having the different backgrounds in some ways helped.
So the other thing is, I noticed in 1996, which is actually part of the reason I came, is that the scientific level was extremely high. The second thing was the just torrential quantity of that high quality stuff that was coming out. In fact, I remember being ecstatic when my publication list was 10% of yours. And the last thing is, even in 96, you had been doing this for a very long time. So this may be a naive or simplistic question, but so other than you, like, what is the secret sauce? Like, how do you do it? Really high quality in very large quantity for a very long time.
Well, I mean, part of it's the people who work there, which includes you and others. Part of it, I think, I felt Judah Folkman was a great role model for me, because he thought big, and he was criticized and he didn't give up. And I think, so if I were to pick a couple things, and finally, I think in a way, the fact that when I went to Children's Hospital in 1974, I was the only engineer there. And today it's quite a bit more common for that kind of cross-disciplinary. But at that point, very, very few people had the kind of background I did, just because they would have gone into an oil company or something like that. Certainly not working in a hospital for a lot less than you could work for in an oil company.
So it took me a while to find a project in your lab, and I remember once spending a lot of time thinking something through, and I went and I presented the idea to you. By this was a conversation that took 2 minutes, as ours usually did. And I asked you, so what do you think? And you were like, well, it's kind of derivative. And that kind of killed it. And also, I remember being at a meeting where someone said they want to do something, it would just be quick and dirty. And you said, if you do something quick and dirty, the one thing you know for sure is it's going to be dirty. And so I guess my question is, how do you set standards? Or because obviously, your lab's calibrated to you and what you think is good. And so where do you get that from, and how do you disseminate that view?
Well, again, I feel like I learned a lot from Dr. Folkman. I feel he, he'd pick important problems, and so that was the first thing, is to pick something that was important. And I should say, my postdoc, my graduate advisor was Clark Colton, and he was very, very rigorous. I mean, he'd keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and I felt in the end I was lucky to have had the two of them, which really had very different sort of mental ways of looking at things. But I really think you learn from the people that you work with, and both of them in their own way were helpful, even though they're very, very different people.
So at the end of your presentation with your son, you referred to niceness. So if you don't mind, I'd like to share an anecdote of what I view as niceness. So it's how I signed up to your lab. So by email, we agreed to meet, and we met on Longwood Ave in front of Children's. And you were late. And so I'm standing there on Longwood Ave, looking both ways. And finally, I see this guy running down Longwood Avenue towards me. And now, having been at Harvard Medical School for some time, I knew, I don't know who this guy is, but it's definitely not Bob Langer, because there is no way that someone with that degree of eminence is running to be on time with me. And I was a fellow at the time, meaning a relative nothing. But in fact, it was you. And actually, that meant so much more to me than all your enormous accolades. So I think, with the niceness thing, you can consider it box checked.
Thank you. Well, I was glad I read. Thank you.
So we have two students that serve as postdocs. Shreya Srinivasi, in my mind, is like next generation Leonardo da Vinci. She's doing all sorts of things, from building bionic limbs to connect with your brain to figuring out your microbiome. And I think she learned a lot by being associated with Bob. So Shreya, this is your time.
One of the things that most impressed me when I started in the lab was, indeed, Bob is just so down to earth. It's almost unbelievable, because you expect someone of such high eminence and importance and intellectual depth to treat you a certain way. And Bob would just, come out of the elevator and be like, "Hi, Shreya, how's it going? Do you need any help? Like, what can I do? Is everything okay?" And it's just such a question of, what can I do to help you? It's not something you expect to hear. And so that level of support and care and attention was always very, at the front of the way you treated folks. And I think it made a huge difference in the lab's culture. As a young faculty now, I spend a lot of time thinking about, how do I hire the right person, the person that's going to grow these ideas and be really creative. You've had such a long history of hiring amazing grad students, postdocs, researchers. What is it that you look for in a young person? Are there signals of kind of creativity and resilience and ingenuity?
Well, first, thank you very much for what you said. And really, I guess what I look for are people who I feel are outstanding, and I might be able to judge that. I mean, in your case, I was on your thesis committee, and I could see that. But sometimes I can see it from, talking to people's advisors, that they say this is the best person, they've ever had work with them. But, I also try to figure it out through, looking at recommendations, other parts of it about what they're interested in. And also, I mean, this is going to sound maybe trite, but it's always very important to me that they be a nice person. And some of that's selfish, because I've had, when I started my career, I had people who weren't so nice. And what that means is that it doesn't affect me immediately in the sense that they're nice to me, but they're not nice to some other people, and then that makes the lab a mess, and an enormous number of complaints. So I think there's a variety of things that I ended up looking for. But those are some of them.
When you think about how society is now engaging with science broadly, do you think there's things that we can do in academia and society in general to kind of re-engage with science as a priority?
Yeah.
To think about being aggressive on pushing technology forward and making that a priority?
Well, I think in academia we're doing. I mean, this particular year is a little bit different than past years. I don't think, certainly in my own lifetime, I haven't seen anything like it. But science is in the United States. If you look at it, and this has been in my lifetime, has had this steady upswing. I think starting with Sputnik and but maybe even before, the atomic bomb in World War II. But Sputnik really, I think, in terms of galvanizing how people wanted to have science in the United States, I think really made part of its fear out of, that was fear that the Russians would beat us. And so I think that incidents like that, then you see more and more money pumped into science and more recognition about why science is important. And it may take incidents like that. I don't know how you change it. I mean, sadly, some of the things that are going on, may not, like that was an immediate event. Some of the things that are going on now, say with Robert Kennedy and vaccines and other things, they may not be immediate. They, sadly, we may have to see people die from it. But I think I don't know what'll happen. Sadly, I think people, my own feeling, I mean, different people in academia are doing what they can. But I think it's just a difficult time in history for science.
If you were to go back, maybe many years, or in another life, is there a different career you would pick, a different problem space you would go after?
Yeah, I feel so lucky that I ended up in this one. I didn't necessarily know that I would. I mean, I love reading about history and things like that, but I mean, maybe, I suppose it wouldn't be that different. But the other thing that I guess I think about is there some way, and I don't know the answer to it, to really revolutionize education, to really change fundamentally how people learn. I keep thinking that there's got to be better than what we've done. And that I did also think about that from the group school, and sometimes I see things like where people have done that, like Montessori schools and things like that. But if there was going to be something else I would have done, it would be that, because I feel education is just so important, and sadly, especially in science education, not well done.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being such an inspiration to all of us.
Thank you.
Great. So our last special guest that Bob didn't know about, and then I'm going to do some rapid questions to Bob. Former rock star, like guitar and stuff, where they would leave a lot of plastic at festivals. Chemical engineer similar to Bob, worked in his lab, and now he's figuring out ways to make plastic sustainable, drawing upon the leadership of Bob. Jan Rosenblum.
Thank you very much.
George.
I really appreciate being here, and thank you, Bob, for
Thank you.
everything we've done together. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Well, when I saw you first in Zurich when you received the chemical engineering medal when I was doing my PhD, and then we met there briefly, and later on I had a conference in Boston, and I said, well, I was fascinated by Bob's fascination for polymer science. I'm a polymer scientist as well, and like Bob said, you can use polymers. They typically are used in the plastic industry, and for the first time, you were thinking, way back, can we use it for drug delivery? And so I thought that was very inspiring. I asked him, hey, do you have time to meet? I didn't expect an answer, honestly. However, he said, yeah, I'm meeting, I think it was Bill Gates at 1, and you can come at 10 to 1, just come by. So I showed up for sure, 11 to 1 actually, and I brought some Swiss chocolate from Switzerland, I remember, and I do also remember we had a chat. You said, what do you want to do? What's your background? Let's figure something out. And you were able to communicate and eat the entire Swiss chocolate in one sitting.
Yeah, I'm very good at eating chocolate.
Me too. Yeah. So we got some common interests there as well. And so, but the question is like what that sort of, and then the other nuances or the other habit that Bob has is he's basically the most responsive person on earth. And I don't understand how that works. We write emails and I get an answer usually in 10 minutes or 1 hour. So any time of day. I remember the moment we wrote a paper, something with Word wasn't working. You said, just copy the entire paper in an email and then you comment on it. It's amazing. So how do you do that? How do you stay sane? And how do you start your day to perform at that level?
a couple things. One is when I was younger, I remember I'd let all these things build up on me, and that would stress me out. And so I, like mail and everything, and I thought to myself, geez, I don't want that. I try to clear the plate as soon as of stuff to do as soon as I can, and that's actually in the end led to less stress for me, because you never know what kinds of things are going to come in the emails or things like that, and I'm always worried. There's so many different things going on. Over the years, I've started the day differently. I used to sleep late. Now I'm up early and have an espresso, which I never used to drink. And then usually my wife and I take long walks. And, so I started like that. It's often very early. I think today we started at, Sam was there, so I think started at 7, but I was up before 6, checking the emails and drinking the coffee.
Great. I support that. I mean, everybody gets into coffee at a certain level and certain age, I guess.
It's been a long time. When I was in college, I worked at a summer job where they had terrible coffee, but everybody wanted the coffee break. And after that, because the coffee was so bad, I didn't drink it for about 40 years.
Yeah, see, that's what bad service can do to you. Well, the other fascinating thing I think that people look up to you for is that you're not only doing science for the sake of science, but you're also doing science to help the world, right? And how do you do that? By actually bringing the technologies from the lab into the real world, and starting companies is what that means. So. And I've been fortunate through your guidance and help to start Macrocycle and Absco Therapeutics, 2 companies, in fact, that are based on polymer science and are solving problems in sustainability and cancer. What do you, and I think more and more people are getting on that path, not only doing science, but creating impact. What's your main advice to science entrepreneurs?
Well, I think first, I always try to say, don't start it too early. Work with great people is the second thing. I always think if you're working in a lot of these industries, you want to make sure you do have good patents, but you want to have great people. I mean, that's really anytime you do a company, it's a team effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Maybe last question, let's talk about failure. So besides, maybe myself as a failure, because we haven't published that paper still, so I'm apologize.
But you're still going to work.
Yeah.
It's a great paper.
We published other papers, yeah, that's true. So what do you consider your biggest failure in your, let's say, in your career or life? And what did you learn from it?
Boy, that's hard because there's so many, and whether there's individual, it's hard to pick a greatest one. I could pick a couple, and certainly early on, not being able to get a job. I mean, it was over and over again getting rejected. Also, not being able to get a grant. I think I had like my first 9 rejected, but I don't know that I can pick to a single one. I've had companies that have failed. I think most of the time we've done very, very well with the students and postdocs in the lab. They've done really well, but maybe there's 1 or 2 out of probably over 1,000 that haven't done great. But those would be some.
And what's the takeaway from any of the failures?
Well, and this probably isn't the right answer in a lot of ways, but I think that everybody, if you try to do at least the kinds of things that we've tried to do, you're gonna fail. I was at an event with George Church the other night, and he had made this saying, which I like. He said, if you don't fail, you haven't tried hard enough. Meaning that, and I think that that's so true. And so I'm really, you learn from your failures. The other saying that I've said is that a lot of times the people that are most successful are those that know how to deal with failure well. I mean, anybody can deal with success. Dealing with failure, that's not so easy, so you have to make sure you can get through it.
Yeah, just keep pushing.